The average American household is now paying $171 per month for electricity. That's over $2,000 a year just to keep the lights on. But that number doesn't tell you the whole story. Because depending on where you live, what kind of home you have, and how your local utility structures their rates, you could be paying anywhere from $80 to $400 a month. And the gap between those numbers is getting wider every single year. I'm going to break down exactly what Americans are actually paying for electricity right now, why there's such a massive difference from state to state, and what that means for your wallet in the coming years. Let's start with the national average, $171 per month. That's based on the typical household using about 877 kilowatt hours of electricity. Now, if you live in Louisiana, you're probably paying around $115 a month. If you're in Hawaii, you're looking at over $550. Same country, same year, completely different reality. Why is there such a huge gap? It comes down to three main factors: how your state generates electricity, how your utility company is regulated, and what kind of infrastructure they're maintaining. States that rely heavily on natural gas or coal tend to have lower rates. States that import most of their power or rely on older, expensive infrastructure tend to have higher rates. And states with heavy renewable energy mandates often fall somewhere in the middle, depending on how those systems were financed. But here's what's really happening beneath those averages. The $171 figure assumes you're living in a moderately sized home, using a reasonable amount of electricity, and paying a middle-of-the-road rate. Most people don't fit that description. If you live in the South, you're running air conditioning 6 to 8 months a year. If you're in the Northeast, you're heating your home through brutal winters. If you're in California, you're dealing with some of the highest electricity rates in the country, combined with mandatory time-of-use pricing. So let's talk about what real people are actually paying. A typical family in Texas might pay $140 in the spring, but that can jump to $300 or more during July and August when the AC is running constantly. A family in Massachusetts might see the opposite pattern, with winter bills spiking as electric heating kicks in. And that's just seasonal variation. The bigger issue is how rates are structured. Most Americans don't realize they're not paying a flat rate for electricity. Almost every utility in the country now uses tiered pricing. That means the first chunk of electricity you use each month costs less per kilowatt hour than the next chunk, which costs less than the chunk after that. This is supposed to encourage conservation, and maybe it does, to some degree. But what it really does is punish families who use more electricity, even when they don't have much choice about it. If you have a larger home, if you have kids, if someone works from home, if you have medical equipment that needs to run 24/7, you're automatically pushed into those higher pricing tiers. And once you're there, every additional kilowatt hour costs significantly more. Then there's time-of-use pricing, which is becoming standard in more and more states. Under this system, electricity costs more during peak hours, usually between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. That's exactly when most people are home, cooking dinner, doing laundry, running the dishwasher. So even if you use the same total amount of electricity as your neighbor, you might pay 30 or 40% more just because of when you use it. Now let's add another layer. Delivery charges and fees. When you look at your electric bill, only about half of what you're paying is for the actual electricity you used. The rest is delivery charges, infrastructure fees, grid maintenance costs, and various regulatory fees that vary wildly by state. In some areas, these fees are fixed. You pay them no matter how much or how little electricity you use. In other areas, they scale with your usage. And in some places, they're going up faster than the electricity rates themselves. This is why cutting your electricity usage by 20% might only reduce your bill by 10 or 12%. Because a huge chunk of what you're paying isn't connected to how much power you actually consume. Here's another thing most people don't know. The average electric bill has increased by 32% over the last 10 years. Not because we're using more electricity. Americans are actually using less electricity per capita than we were a decade ago. We're paying more for less. Better appliances, LED light bulbs, more efficient HVAC systems. All of that has reduced consumption. But rates have gone up so much that the savings are completely wiped out. And this trend isn't slowing down. Most utility analysts are projecting another 15 to 20% increase over the next 5 years. That would put the average American household bill at close to $200 a month by 2030. But again, that's just an average. If you're in a high-cost state, you could be looking at $250 or $300 as your new normal. So what does all this mean for you? It means that budgeting for electricity isn't as simple as looking at last year's bills and adding a few dollars. It means that the strategies people used 10 years ago to save money, like switching to CFLs or turning down the thermostat, aren't nearly as effective anymore. And it means that more and more Americans are starting to ask a very serious question. Is there a better way to do this? Because when you're paying $2,000, $3,000, even $5,000 a year for electricity, and that number keeps climbing regardless of what you do, at some point you have to wonder if staying completely dependent on the grid makes sense. I'm not saying everyone needs to go off-grid tomorrow, but I am saying that understanding what you're actually paying for and why is the first step toward making better decisions about your energy future. The average is $171, but you're not average. Your home isn't average. Your situation isn't average. And the solutions that might work for you probably aren't average either. I've included some state-by-state data in the description below, along with information about how different rate structures actually work. If you want to see exactly where your state ranks and what's driving costs in your area, that's a good place to start. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe for more practical analysis of how energy costs actually work and what your options are beyond just accepting higher bills every year. The utility companies want you to think this is normal. It's not.